Drums boomed, gongs clanged so loud the noise throbbed deep inside my ears. I stood up on the embroidered pavilion upper balcony, both hands curled tight around a blazing red silk marriage ball. Down below, the city street was absolutely crammed. Men and women packed both curbs, every neck stretched upward. All eyes locked on the spectacle unfolding above them. Spring breezes tangled with the golden tassels strung onto my ball. Those fine threads kept brushing again and again across the backs of my hands. I just stared at that searing bright red frozen in place. My handmaid, Kinga, was practically hopping from foot to foot beside me, growing more anxious by the second. "Miss," she hissed. "Master has dispatched servants down to the streets far in 3 separate times already. Where on earth is young Master Pei? Why hasn't he shown his face?" My fingers squeezed harder around the stitched ball. Pei. Just hearing that name hit me like an old thorn. That thorn might have been pulled free from my flesh long ago. Yet the dull, aching twinge lingered all the same. I tilted my gaze down toward the crowd below the balcony. My father, Shen Huan, stood right at the crowd's edge. His gaze kept darting toward the avenue's distant end. Not far from him stood my cousin Shen Mingxiu. Every single sight felt hauntingly familiar. My chest grew tight. This was no dream. I had traveled back in time. I was 18 once more, right on that fateful day. This was the very public marriage ball ceremony my family held for me. The same event that changed everything in my past life. I'd worn this exact crabapple red robe once before. I'd clutched this very embroidered ball, one I'd spent half a month stitching myself. Back then I'd waited for 30 whole minutes. My father kept urging me to toss the ball. Clan elders kept trying to talk me into making my throw. The crowd below grew restless, murmuring louder and louder. Still, I'd stubbornly held back. Pei and I had struck a deal. If he positioned himself directly underneath this pavilion, I would send that ball flying straight into his arms. Back then my heart had brimmed over with pure giddy joy. I truly believed I was finally going to wed the young man I'd loved for 3 long years. But what came after I stuck by Pei through every bit of his grinding poverty? I handed over one of the shops my late mother had left behind, just so his family could have a proper roof over their heads. I paid for physicians and herbal treatments to care for his ailing mother. I begged influential connections to get respected scholars to take him on as a pupil. I bought his garments, kept his household running, handled every social obligation his thin purse could never cover. 10 full years. 10 years of my life. The girl who once could pore over account books, draw intricate embroidery patterns, and haggle for hours with cloth merchants. That girl faded away. All I became was a woman endlessly waiting for her husband to return home. Just Madame Pei, nothing more. And in the end Pei demanded a formal divorce. I can still picture him in that study room, sliding our separation papers across the wooden desktop toward me. His face was calm, almost completely indifferent. I looked him straight in the eyes and asked him one simple question. Was there even a single day where you honestly pictured growing old beside me? Silence stretched on for ages. At last he spoke. Shenzai, if you had not forced that embroidered ball onto me all those years ago, I never would have married you at all. That day he laid it bare. That precious beginning I'd cherished for an entire decade to him. It was nothing but an unwanted burden forced upon his life. 2 years after I left the Pei household, sickness wore me down until I drew my final breath. Right before my eyes closed forever, my mind replayed the scene of this very embroidered pavilion. My thoughts kept spinning over one terrible what if. What if I had not waited for Pei? What if I'd thrown that ball to somebody else entirely? I never thought fate would actually grant me a second shot to live that moment differently. Sigh. My father's voice boomed upward from the street below. I snapped back to the present moment and glanced down. A servant belonging to the Pei family had just pushed through the throng of onlookers. He called up toward the pavilion. Young Master Pei ran into several classmates along his route. He will be delayed a short while. The man hesitated. Might it be best for the young miss to wait just a little longer? In my former life, I jumped immediately to make excuses for Pei right then. I told myself he valued his friendships too much to rush off. I thought he was a proud, reserved scholar, that he did not wish to look overly eager to marry into our wealthy Shen household. Now, hearing those exact same excuses spill out, the whole thing felt utterly ridiculous. I was the woman standing up here carrying out this public ball-tossing ritual. He knew perfectly well what day this was. Even so, he chose to act as if marrying me barely mattered one way or another. Once I'd mistaken that cold distance for noble dignity. Kinga leaned close and whispered my name again. I set the heavy embroidered ball balanced flat across my open palm. Then I smiled. Why should I wait for him? Kinga froze where she stood. But Miss Young Master Pei. He is not here. My tone stayed light. Isn't that perfect? I stepped forward toward the stone balcony railing. All the noisy chatter rising up from the street slowly faded away. My father sensed something was wrong. His facial features shifted, alarm spreading across his face. Zai! I paid him no mind that down at the avenue's far end, the crisp clink of horsehoof ornaments cut through the air. The densely packed crowd, so tightly crammed you could barely slip water between bodies, suddenly split wide open. People scrambled, hurrying to press themselves against both sides of the road, that I turned toward the sound. A tall jet-black horse advanced forward at an easy, unhurried gait. A man sat tall in its saddle. He wore rich black brocade robes. No flashy trinkets hung from his waist. Only a dark, carved official token rested there. His features were sharp, cool-edged. His skin held an unusual paleness. When his long, narrow eyes swept across the street below, every whisper and murmur in the surrounding crowd died instantly. Like an invisible hand had crushed every last voice. Someone nearby gasped aloud in shock at the 9,000-year lord. What in the world was Xie Linyuan doing out beyond the palace walls today? Whispers rippled quietly through the crowd. People too frightened to speak loudly. Of course I knew that name. He headed the court of ceremonial, kept hold of the imperial seal, led palace eunuch affairs. He ranked among the most powerful figures in the entire capital city. Back in my old life, nobody dared cross him. Our paths had never once crossed. All I knew was this 9,000-year lord had never taken a wife. Not even a single concubine lived within his manor grounds. As time passed, word spread that he gradually stepped back from heavy palace duties. What unfolded after that, I never learned. But here and now, by pure chance, he was riding directly underneath my pavilion balcony. With every person rushing to get out of his path, a huge empty patch of street opened up all around his horse. I stared down at the bright red ball resting in my two hands. In that instant, everything that had played out in my past life felt absurd. I'd planned every tiny detail so carefully. I'd been dead set to make sure that ball landed securely in Peiyu's arms. That choice had cost me 10 long years of my existence. This time to hell with careful plans. Anybody would do. Miss, don't. Kinga cried out in alarm. My arm was already lifting high. The red ball sailed through open air. Its golden tassels glinted and flashed under bright sunlight. Every single person on the street tilted their heads upward to watch its flight. It soared past multiple young men who stretched out their hands, desperately trying to catch hold. Then a gust of spring wind caught its weight. It drifted further than I had intended, flying straight toward that black horse. Even I went completely still. In the next heartbeat, Xie Linyuan lifted one hand. The embroidered ball landed perfectly square within his grasp. Complete, dead silence swallowed the whole street. Behind me, all color drained right out of my father's face. Kinga drew in a sharp, shocked breath. I gripped the balcony railing tight. My own mind went blank for a few fleeting seconds. All right, I might have thrown just a little too hard. Xie Linyuan looked down at that vivid red ball cupped in his palms. Then he tilted his head upward, toward me. 2 full stories separated us. I could not make out every nuance of his expression, but those eyes held a frightening, unshakable calm. That stillness sent a chill crawling all the way down my spine. Then commotion erupted from the rear of the gathered crowd. Make way! Young Master Peiyu is here. I twisted my head to look. Peiyu had finally arrived. At 22 years old, he stood in the peak of his handsome youth. I remembered his pale green scholar's robe, his neat jade hair crown, his fine, elegant features. It was clear he had rushed over. A thin layer of sweat glistened across his forehead. He shoved his way through the onlookers. The very first thing he laid eyes on was me. The second thing he saw was that embroidered ball held in Xie Linyuan's arms. His expression transformed in an instant. In my old life, I'd waited for him for half an hour on this exact spot. Right now I did not want to spare even one more second looking at him down there. Xia Lin Yuan spoke. His voice was not raised. Even so, every soul out on that street heard each word crystal cleared. Miss Shen, did your hand slip? He lifted the ball slightly in his hold. Or does this toss officially count? My father hurried forward to the balcony edge. 9,000-year lord, my daughter. Father. I cut him off before he could finish. I directed my gaze straight down toward Xia Lin Yuan. It counts. A collective gasp rolled across the crowd. Pei Yu's gaze locked hard onto my figure. Zai. I refused to glance his way. Xia Lin Yuan, for his part, appeared faintly surprised that after a short pause, he swung his body down off the horse's back. Black boots landed firmly onto the stone-paved roadway. That bright crimson embroidered ball looked almost comical, held against the deep dark fabric of his robes. He walked step by measured step toward the base of the pavilion. Once he reached there, he lifted his face up toward me. If it counts, he said in an even, steady tone, then I accept. A spring gust swept the length of the avenue. In that moment, I felt such a strange, overwhelming sensation. It was as if the heavy door that had trapped me for 10 whole years in my previous life had finally been thrown wide open. That I had no idea what waited on the other side. But one truth stood unshakable. The man waiting for me there would no longer be Pei Yu. Chaos descended over the Shen household that very same afternoon. My father skipped lunch entirely. The moment I descended the stairs from the embroidered pavilion, he dragged me straight into his private study, slammed the wooden door shut, and paced back and forth in furious agitation. This is preposterous, Shenzai. Willful as you are, you ought to understand there are lines you simply cannot cross. I settled into a wooden chair and sipped my tea. After all the tension of that morning, my throat genuinely felt parched. My quiet composure only stoked his anger higher. Do you grasp just who that man is? Xia Lin Yuan, the 9,000-year lord. You know next to nothing about him. Still you dared to declare that marriage ball toss was binding. I set my teacup down gently on the table surface. Father, weren't you the one who stated whoever caught the embroidered ball would become my husband? He choked on his words for a moment. That depends entirely upon who ends up catching it. So when you told me I could choose my own match, what you truly meant was I could pick only people you had already approved of. His thick brows drew tightly together. I am doing this for your own good. I had heard that exact phrase so many times throughout my past life. When Pei Yu pressured me to give up running my embroidery shop, he claimed it was for my own good. When his mother demanded I hand over my dowry funds for her to administer, that was supposedly for my own good too. When my father told me I needed to endure hardship because men carried heavy burdens outside the home, again for my own good. It was as if tacking those 4 little words onto any sentence granted every person around me full permission to make every major life choice on my behalf. I let out a soft sigh. Father, are you genuinely terrified I will end up in a bad marriage? Or are you simply frightened by the title 9,000-year lord? My father opened his mouth, then fell quiet. After a long pause, his body sank heavy down into a chair. Both, he admitted. At least he would not lie to me. Zai, you are still young. You fail to comprehend. The 9,000-year lord's manor may look magnificent from outside, but that household follows no ordinary rules. What will become of you after you wed him? You will not even be able to bear children. He cut himself off abruptly. Realization washed over him. He ought not speak of such blunt matters with an unwed daughter. That I did not blush or look away. That is still a matter for me to weigh. Not something for others to settle. Then simply inform me of the final result. My father stared at me, his expression tangled and complicated. He most likely could not fathom how his daughter had walked up those pavilion steps that morning and come back down as a completely different woman. But I had changed. I had not turned into some stranger. I had simply reclaimed who I truly was. We sat in heavy silence for quite some time. Then knocks rapped against the study door. The steward's voice filtered through, sounding distinctly ill at ease. Master. Young Master Pei Yu has arrived. My fingers paused, resting against my teacup. My father immediately shifted his gaze toward me. The two of you need to talk this through. He grasped this as a lifeline. He personally went to usher Pei Yu inside. I did not move from my seat. There were things that truly needed saying. Peyu stepped across the threshold, his face grim. My father patted his shoulder. You young folks sort out your own troubles. He shot me one sharp warning glance, making it crystal clear I ought not dig in my heels and be stubborn once more. Then he exited and pulled the door shut behind him. Only Peyu and I remained inside that study room. He planted himself before the writing desk and studied me for a long stretch of time. That the very first words out of his mouth were sharp. Have you finished creating this mess? I almost laughed out loud. Pardon me. He lowered his voice. Zai, I know I ran late today, but I already sent a servant to explain everything to Uncle Shun. I happened upon classmates out on the road. Was such a trivial incident really justification for hurling your marriage ball towards Xie Linyuan? There it was, exactly as it had always been. Once anything passed through Peiyu's lips, his mistakes shrank down to small, insignificant missteps. The hours I spent waiting a minor inconvenience. My hurt and disappointment nothing worth dwelling on. All my sacrifices trivial. Only his dignity, his ambitions, his personal struggles deserve to be taken seriously. I spoke up. Tell me plainly. Did you come here today because you wished to marry me? He froze in place. What? You seem so invested in deciding who I get to wed. So I ask you directly. Do you want to marry me? His brows slowly knitted together. Zai, we grew up side by side. You know full well all my focus right now belongs to my scholarly studies. Meaning you do not wish to marry me. His features darkened. That is not what I said. Then what exactly are you trying to say? I simply believe marriage is far too important to weaponry in some childish fit of spite. A faint smile touched my lips. Peyu, if you do not wish to marry me, by what right do you claim my choice to wed someone else amounts to nothing more than getting back at you? For the first time he fell completely silent. I saw it then. The 22-year-old Peyu was nowhere near as untouchable as my memories painted him. He had just grown thoroughly accustomed to me orbiting around his world. So accustomed, in fact, that even my rejection had to be interpreted as yet another expression of affection for him. He kept staring. After many long moments he voiced his question. Do you truly intend to go through with marrying him? Ido. You do not even know the man. I never truly knew you either. Those words slipped out before I could hold them back. Even I went rigid. Peiyu's expression shifted at last. Shunzai, what has happened to you? Nothing. I rose to my feet. I have simply made up my mind. I will not wait for you any longer. Total stillness wrapped around the study. He had most certainly never expected those words to come from my mouth. Just then, the steward's voice echoed again from outside the door. Mississippi messengers have arrived from Lord Xie's manor. My father appeared even faster than the servants. The visitor was the Xie household steward, a courteous man in his 40s. Master Shun, Miss Shun. My lord sent me to deliver an item. He held out a polished lacquered wooden box using both hands. Resting inside lay a formal marriage contract. One glance, and my father's face drained of color. I picked the document up. There were no flowery, over-the-top promises written upon its pages. Instead, it read with the cool, precise tone of a formal business agreement. 3 specific clauses seized my full attention. First, every piece of property that made up Shunzai's dowry would stay fully under my personal authority after marriage. The Xie family would hold 0 rights to meddle with it. Second, should Shunzai wish to open shops or run commercial ventures after the wedding, the Xie household would never leverage its status to block my work. Third, before the wedding ceremony formally took place, Shunzai retained the right to end this engagement at any moment. Should I change my heart? I lifted my head. Was that final term also the 9,000-year lord's doing? The steward smiled gently. My lord added that clause with his own hand. Peyu stood off to one side. His countenance worsened with every passing second. Even my father looked utterly stunned. Did the 9,000-year lord relay any further message? My father asked. The steward considered for a heartbeat. Yes. He pulled a narrow slip of paper from within his sleeve. This bears my lord's own handwriting. I accepted the slip. Only a single line was written there. The calligraphy was elegant, sharp-edged. A marriage cannot truly be decided by a single embroidered ball. If Miss Shen accepts it, I accept it. If she does not, this matter ends right here. I stared at those words. For some reason, my chest grew tight. In my past life, I had spent 10 years begging for nothing more simple than this. The freedom to make my own choices. That I carefully folded the note and tucked it safely within my sleeve. Then I turned toward the steward. Please inform the 9,000-year lord, I shall visit his manor in person tomorrow. Peiyu spun toward me. Shenzai. I paid him no heed. My gaze drifted past the doorway, toward the brilliant spring sunlight flooding outdoors. This time, I would judge for myself what sort of man had caught my flying marriage ball. The following afternoon, I set off for the Xie Manor. My father would not come along. Only Kinga accompanied me. He had wanted to bar my departure, but after seeing that marriage contract, in the end he said nothing more than to remind me to return home before nightfall. The Xie residence sat within the capital's eastern quarter. The ground stretched wide, yet it looked nothing like what I had pictured. No ranks of grim-faced guards lined the outer perimeter. No ostentatious displays of power assaulted your eyes. The whole place was quiet, unnervingly quiet. As the steward guided us across the front courtyard, the only sounds reaching my ears were dry leaves rustling in soft wind. That Kinga stayed close on my heels. She whispered low, "Miss, why does this manor feel as though hardly anyone lives here?" I offered no reply. I felt exactly the same way. Xie Linyuan received me inside his study. He had changed out of that imposing black official robe he'd worn in the street. Now he wore plain dark gray garments. The overwhelming aura of authority that had clung to him out among the crowd had faded away. He looked younger than all the gossip and rumors claimed. When I stepped inside, he was immersed reading official state memorials. He closed the documents and set them aside. "Miss Shen." I gave a formal bow. 9,000-year lord. He gestured toward the chair positioned across the table from him. "Sit." Tea had already been poured on the tabletop. When I lifted my cup, I caught a faint osmanthus fragrance drifting upward. That small detail genuinely surprised me. Xie Linyuan must have noticed my reaction. "That is the only blend we keep in this household. Does Miss Shen dislike it?" "No," I answered and took a slow sip. "It is quite good." He nodded. Then silence settled over the room. I held on to my teacup. For the very first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to meet someone hopelessly bad at polite small talk. Eventually I was forced to break the quiet. "I have read through your marriage contract. That final clause. You added it yourself." "I did." "Why?" Xie Linyuan lifted his eyes toward mine. "If you come to regret this match, what sense would there be in forcing you to marry me?" Spoken by almost any other powerful noble, those words would sound ordinary. Coming from the 9,000-year lord, they felt shockingly unexpected. I let a small laugh escape. "Everybody claims you are nearly impossible to hold a conversation with. That is because most people who seek audience with me do not arrive to discuss marriage." Before I could stop myself, I laughed out loud. He cast a glance over at me. Plainly, he could not fathom what I found so amusing. Even so, the heavy atmosphere in the study lightened considerably. That I shifted into a more serious tone. 9,000-year lord, I came here today seeking understanding. Why would you agree to enter this marriage? That embroidered ball landed in your lap by pure chance. You could so easily have pretended the whole incident never took place. He did not answer right away. His fingertips tapped twice, soft and deliberate, against the wooden tabletop. "Miss Shen, do you have any notion how many families have tried to send young women into my household over these many years? I can well imagine. All for one single reason: my power and influence." His voice stayed perfectly calm. "Some offer their daughters. Some offer nieces. Some their younger sisters. Every last one swears deep admiration for me. Yet not one of them has ever learned what foods I prefer to eat." I held my tongue. Xie Linyuan turned his gaze toward the window. I had never intended to take a wife. But when that ball went flying down toward me yesterday, a thought crossed my mind. He paused, as though unused to unpacking his inner thoughts aloud. It struck me as interesting. I stared over at him. That is all. Merely interesting. At first, yes. Afterwards, You declared publicly that the toss counted. He met my eyes once more. And so I thought. If you dare to own that choice openly, why ought I not do the same? In that moment something clicked inside my head. He and I were vastly different people. Even so, we shared one strange common thread. For his entire life, other people had tried dictating who Xie Lin Yuan ought to be. What the palace demanded of him. What his rank required. What gossip insisted he must act like. Everyone knew exactly how the 9,000-year lord was supposed to carry himself. Perhaps no soul had ever stopped to ask what Xie Lin Yuan himself truly desired. I set my teacup down on the table surface. I have 3 conditions of my own. One of his eyebrows lifted. Speak them. First, I will never exploit your status to seize unfair business advantages for my embroidery shops. Agreed. Second, you may offer advice concerning my affairs, but you will never make final decisions for me. Agreed. Third, I hesitated a brief moment. If one day we realize we simply are not suited for one another, we must at the very least refuse to torment each other. The study fell completely still. Xie Lin Yuan posed a question out of the blue. Has someone tormented you in times past? My fingers tightened slightly around my lap. Not exactly. I have simply witnessed far too many miserable marriages. He did not press for further details. He simply nodded. Agreed. I drew in a deep breath. Then I accept this marriage. Xie Lin Yuan studied my face for several heartbeats. Then he stretched one hand across the table. Passed the contract over. I handed it to him. He picked up a writing brush and inscribed his name neatly along the document's bottom margin, Xie Lin Yuan. Then he slid the contract back toward my side of the table. I grasped the brush. I wrote Shenzai. For the very first time, our 2 names sat side by side upon paper. My heart did not thunder wildly inside my chest. There was no grand sense of fate wrapping around me, but as I held that brush in my grip, a strange, quiet peace washed over me that this time around. I was the one putting my own name down that once I returned to the Shen estate. I set about sorting through every item that made up my dowry. Going through those possessions forced me to recognize just how foolish I had been in my previous life. My late mother had left behind 3 thriving shops, a modest country manor, multiple chests filled with fine jewelry, plus an independent 30% ownership stake in the Jinyan embroidery house. One of those shops stood right on Linshu Street. In my old life, even before my wedding day, I had resolved to give that shop straight over to the Pei family. My reasoning back then felt so straightforward. Pei Yu's mother suffered poor health. Pei Yu needed a quiet space to focus on his studies. I had even ordered brand new furnishings delivered for their use. Remembering all that spurred me into action. That very same evening, I instructed Kinga to cancel every single one of those old arrangements. Father came to pay me a visit. He looked distinctly ill at ease. Messengers arrived from the Pei household today. They are asking when we intend to hand over the deed for the Linshu Street shop. I lifted my head. Why would we hand that property over? He frowned deeply. But you promised it to them once before. That was then. This shop forms part of my personal dowry. My father fell silent. Zai, are you intentionally trying to bring shame upon the Pei family? I closed the account ledger I had been going through. Father, if I choose not to give away something that rightfully belongs to me, how could that humiliate any person? He had no reply to offer. So many events from my past life now struck me as almost laughable. I had given and given for so long that everyone around me grew convinced those gifts had always been theirs by right. Now that I merely kept hold of what was mine, somehow I became labeled cruel and unkind. My father left my quarters without saying another word, that I kept working through stacks of account books. I had just reached the sections covering Jinyan embroidery house when Kinga hurried into the room. Miss, Uncle Ju is here. Uncle Ju had managed business operations ever since my mother was still alive. For many years, he had overseen Jinyan embroidery house. He bowed respectfully toward me, then let out a heavy sigh. Miss, there is a trouble I ought not burden you with while you are busy preparing for a wedding. Still, after turning the thought over in my mind, I believe you must hear this news. I looked toward him. What is it? His smile turned bitter. Jinyan embroidery house has operated at a loss for 3 months running. I stared down at the account book spread open across my table. My heart gave one heavy, painful thud. Back in my former life, I had paid zero attention to these business troubles. Every single thought inside my head revolved around becoming the perfect Madame Pei. Later on, Jinyan declined year after year. By the moment I finally wished to return and take part in the business, there was no longer any place waiting for me there. But this time, everything could still be changed. Given this second chance at life, I was not satisfied merely swapping out who I married. I meant to reclaim the life I myself had carelessly thrown away. Early the next morning, I traveled over to Jinyan Embroidery House. This was an old Shin family-run enterprise, passed down through multiple generations. At its peak, half the households across this district ordered their daughters' wedding robes right here. Yet the instant I stood out front, I spotted the root of their troubles. The outer building still looked impressive. The shop sign shone bright from constant polishing. But the clothing samples hanging on public display looked identical to styles I remembered seeing fully 5 years prior. Inside the main shop, 2 clerks leaned lazily against the counter, gossiping with each other. Only once they spotted Uncle Ju leading me inside did they scramble to straighten their postures. Eldest miss. I nodded. I did not unleash scolding words. Instead, I asked Uncle Ju to bring me all account records spanning the prior 6 months. My uncle Shen Huan rushed out from the back courtyard the second word of my arrival reached him. Shen Mingxiu walked in alongside him. She wore a neat apricot-colored dress, her hair pinned up in a tidy, practical fashion. When she saw me seated within the accounting room, flipping through pages of records, her opening remark was sharp. "Elder sister, why have you found spare time to drop by the shop all of a sudden? Your wedding draws near. Ought you not stay home, stitching your wedding garments?" No outright malice colored her tone. Still, there was no true warmth there either. I lifted my gaze. "Seamstresses can complete my wedding robes. I have come to look over the accounts." She gave a thin smile. "What is there worth examining? You barely set foot in this building 3 times each year. Now you wish to meddle in our work. Do you even understand which styles sell well with customers?" Her words stung, yet they were not entirely wrong. In my previous existence, I had abandoned this world of commerce far too soon. If I marched in now, as the legitimate eldest daughter, and simply ordered everyone to obey my commands, I would feel resentful too. So I did not grow angry. "You speak the truth, Mingxiu." Mingxiu looked genuinely startled. "I have stayed away from managing these businesses for a long time. I will not attempt to take full charge over all of Jinyan. My mother's 30% share has always collected its own separate dividend payments. That small southern branch shop has always belonged under that same share." I pushed the account book aside. "Grant me 1 month's time. Let me run that southern shop myself." My uncle's forehead creased. "You intend to manage it personally?" "Aido." Shin Mingxiu shot a question right away. "And what if you lose money?" "I will bear every loss entirely on my own. Not a single copper coin from the main Jinyan shop will be touched during this month. Should I operate at a loss, I will never again interfere with Jinyan's management. But if I turn a profit," I looked her directly in the eyes, "none of you will ever again claim I hold no right to question property that belongs to me." Shin Mingxiu studied me for a long stretch of time. Then one of her eyebrows lifted upward. "Very well. I shall wait and see exactly what elder sister can accomplish." Once that agreement was settled, I dedicated 3 full days going over stock and merchandise. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became why Jinyan kept losing money. No one was stealing funds. The managers were not incompetent. The business had simply grown stale and stuck in old habits. Jinyan specialized in heavily ornamented wedding gowns and dense, elaborate embroidery work. A single garment could take 2 or 3 months from receiving the order to final delivery. On paper, profit margins appeared high. But once you factored in seamstress wages, reworking botched pieces, spoiled fabric, and inventory storage costs, barely any profit remained. Meanwhile, ordinary families looking for simple, fresh spring season clothing would never even think of stepping foot inside Jinyan's doors. That was exactly where I would begin. I sketched an entire new line of lighter springwear. No embroidery covering every inch of fabric. Only bright decorative stitching along collars, lapels, and cuffs. Lower material costs. faster production timelines, more affordable price points. After hearing my whole plan laid out, Uncle Ju nodded repeatedly. Miss may not have visited often in these past years, but your sharp eye for commerce has not faded one bit. I smiled. It was not that I had ever truly lost those skills. Those 10 exhausting years running every tiny expense of the Pei household had forced me to calculate every last coin down to the smallest grain of rice. Talents that ought to have fed my own business had been wasted, patching over holes inside another person's life. On the fourth day, Uncle Ju and I stayed hard at work long after sunset. We had just finished logging our final fabric shipment when I stepped outside. Parked along the street's edge sat a familiar black-painted carriage. Kinga spotted it first. Miss, that is Lord Xie's carriage. I paused in my steps. The carriage curtain drew aside. Xie Lin Yuan sat within the vehicle. Climb in, he said. I stepped up into the carriage. The space inside held a pleasant warmth. Upon the small side table rested a plate of chestnut cakes, still giving off soft wisps of steam. I had eaten nothing all day except half a bowl of plain noodles. The instant I caught that sweet aroma, my stomach betrayed me with a quiet rumble. For once, Xie Lin Yuan's gaze drifted over toward me. Heat flooded my cheeks with embarrassment. What brings you here? I picked up one cake and took a bite. Are you merely passing by? The Xie Manor lies 3 streets distant from this shop, he replied, his expression completely unchanged. One might scarcely call this passing by. I glanced out the carriage window. The Xie household steward stood waiting beside the wheels. He gave a soft, quiet cough. Understanding dawned on me. How long have you been waiting out here? I just arrived, Xie Lin Yuan stated flatly. Kinga stood down on the street. Her head hung low, her shoulders visibly shaking as she fought to hold back laughter. I set my half-eaten cake down. I struggled hard to keep amusement out of my voice. 9,000-year lord. The servants under you are absolutely terrible at lying on your behalf. Xie Lin Yuan's gaze shifted toward his steward. The man instantly twisted his face away, avoiding eye contact. After 2 heartbeats of silence, Xie Lin Yuan spoke in a cool tone. Deduct a portion of his monthly salary. A hurt-sounding cry drifted up from outside. My lord! I finally burst out laughing. The carriage set off, traveling back toward the Shen family estate. I leaned against the soft-cushioned interior wall. All the tight tension built up in my shoulders after that long, grueling workday slowly melted away. 3 days later, our southern branch shop reopened its doors. I deliberately hung examples of our brand-new clothing out front on display. Exactly as I anticipated, crowds of young women flocked over to look them over. I stood there from sunrise until late afternoon. Many shoppers asked about price tags. Far fewer actually made purchases. By closing time, we counted only 7 completed sales. That amounted to half of what I had projected and hoped for. Uncle Ju wore a worried look. Kinga did not dare utter a single word. I stared down at the sales ledger for a long while. Being reborn did not grant me automatic victory at everything I attempted. Shen Mingshu paid us a visit that afternoon. She did not come to jeer or mock me. She simply inspected our new garments and offered her observation. Elder sister's designs are undeniably fresh. But girls of 16 and 17 are not the only customers with money to spend on clothing. Once she departed, I kept staring at those unsold garments spread across our tables. For the first time I grasped an important truth. This second life was not about recalling answers I had learned in my past. I needed to learn how to live all over again. That night, I did not head back to the Shen estate. I stayed in the small sleeping quarters built behind the shop. Kinga brought bedding for me, all the while complaining on my behalf. Miss Mingshu makes it sound so effortless. She has worked within Jinyan for years. Of course she understands what sells well. I sat at the work table, unpicking stitches from one of our new spring dress samples. She is not wrong. I overlooked critical pieces of this puzzle. Miss, even if the business loses money, it is not the end of everything. I cannot expect every customer to buy our goods simply because I am the eldest daughter of the Shen family. I bit my tongue before I accidentally mentioned my rebirth out loud. Kinga stared at me, confused. I bowed my head and kept pulling threads loose from the dress cuff. That night, I laid out every garment. our best-selling items alongside those that barely sold, spread them one by one across my bed. I compared every detail side by side. That the next morning, I personally spoke with more than a dozen customers who wandered through our shop. It did not take long for the real problem to surface. Young women loved bright, vivid colors, but their mothers usually controlled all household spending money. Those older matrons found our bold new patterns far too daring. Meanwhile, elder women thought our styles looked much too youthful for their age. Then an idea popped into my mind. If a single garment could not satisfy every group of shoppers, why stitch every decorative detail permanently into the fabric itself? 3 days afterwards, our shop rolled out a brand new system. Base garments had simple, restrained cuts, but collars, cuffs, and waist sashes could all be detached and swapped out separately. A young lady fond of crabapple red could fasten on a red embroidered border. If her mother deemed the shade too loud, she could remove it at home and swap it for muted lotus pink trim. One single dress could be styled 3 or 4 distinct ways. Those separate decorative pieces carried low price tags. Even shoppers who held no intention of purchasing a full new outfit might spend a few loose silver coins for a magnolia blossom embroidered waist sash. That on day 1 of this new approach, we still only sold around a dozen pieces. By day 3, customers were arriving specifically to ask when fresh new patterns would become available. Half a month later, I sat within our accounting room and tallied our final numbers. I stared over those figures for quite some time. The profit remained tiny compared to the massive earnings of the main Jinyan shop, almost insignificant on paper. But these were the very first coins I had truly earned through my own efforts in this new life. My father had not gifted this money to me. These funds were not already sitting inside my dowry chests. Nor had I scraped these earnings together sacrificing everything for some other person. I had built this profit myself. Kinga grew, so excited she nearly sent abacus beads scattering everywhere across the table. "Miss, we actually turned a profit." I laughed, tapping gently against the back of her hand. "Careful now." Right at that moment, the Xia household steward appeared outside our doorway. "Miss Shen." He carried a small wooden box in his hands. No jewelry lay inside. No ornate hairpins, no carved jade bracelets. Only a rosewood abacus, beautifully crafted. Not a single scrap of gold or precious stone decorated its surface. I lifted it up. 2 small carved characters sat along its side. "Earned by oneself." I froze in place. The steward smiled. "My lord instructed me to bring this, to congratulate Miss Shun on your shop's successful profit." I ran my thumb lightly over those carved characters, then asked, "How did he learn about this?" The steward answered with completely unflinching honesty. "Manager Ju visited Lord Xie's manor yesterday to take measurements for your wedding garments. He happened to mention your good fortune in passing conversation." I laughed out loud. So Xie Linyuan had not dispatched secret spies to keep watch over me. News had simply grown legs and wandered straight into his manor all on its own. That very same evening, he came to collect me once more. When I stepped up into his carriage, I made a point of saying nothing at all. I simply set that rosewood abacus down directly in front of him. He glanced down toward it. "You have received my gift." "I have," I said. "Do you like it?" "Why an abacus? Other people give gold hair ornaments and jade bracelets when celebrating an engagement. Do you lack those trinkets?" His question stopped me short. "No." "Then there would be no purpose in giving you more of them." His reasoning was annoyingly sound. I rolled one of the abacus beads back and forth underneath my fingertip. "What do those 2 carved characters mean?" "Money you earn yourself belongs solely to you. If you sustain losses, those losses rest on you alone. When profits come, those profits are yours as well." He spoke in his usual calm tone. "Did you send this to comfort me, remembering those rough first few days when sales were poor?" "No," he shook his head. "This is congratulations." My fingers went still. A memory surfaced. Back whenever Pei Yu heard I wished to manage shops, he would always say the Shen family scarcely needed whatever trivial sums I might earn. Why should a woman soil herself chasing the smell of copper coins? Xie Linyuan had never dismissed my profit as small. He had never called my business meaningless. He simply said congratulations. On impulse, I pulled the carriage curtain aside. 9,000, dear lord. Do not take me back to the Shin residence tonight. One of his eyebrows lifted. I spotted something dark flicker deep in his eyes, and I instantly realized how my words must have sounded. What thoughts are you entertaining? He asked. I mean, take me over to the southern district. I wish to buy you a late-night supper. Xie Lin Yuan turned his face away. After several long seconds ticked by, he responded. Finish speaking your full thought before you open your mouth next time. I laughed so hard I nearly folded over against the carriage window. That night, we ate wonton soup from a street-side food stall. To witness the feared 9,000-year lord perched upon a tiny wooden stool beside the road drew countless terrified stares from passers-by. The food vendor's hands shook so badly I eventually had to carry our 2 bowls over to our spot myself. Xie Lin Yuan ate 1 wonton, then asked me, Did you come here often? I used to, I answered. My spoon paused hovering above the bowl. Later on I married Peiyu. His mother disapproved of street-sold food. Peiyu told me Madame Pei ought not wander the outdoors all day long. So I stopped coming. In time I even forgot this place existed. I lowered my head and ate another wonton. But now I remember again. Xie Lin Yuan did not press me for further stories. He simply pushed his small dipping sauce dish across the table toward my side. But the next morning when I arrived at my shop, grim news awaited. 2 embroideresses who had already agreed on wages and were meant to start work at month's end had abruptly changed their minds. Uncle Ju's face clouded over with anger. They went over to the main Jinian shop. This news did not catch me by surprise. Shin Mingxi was never going to step aside and let me succeed without a fight. She had offered those women 20% higher pay than I could afford. From their perspective, choosing Jinian made perfect sense. Miss Mingxi is doing this deliberately. Uncle Ju fumed. You finally got the shop steady on its feet, and now she steals away our workers right at this moment. I flipped through work rosters for the embroideresses who still remained employed with us. This is business. She possesses the funds to offer better pay. The women chose to accept it. There is no point complaining. Then what shall we do? We will train our very own people. Our shop remains small. Trying to outspend Jinian throwing silver around would be foolish. So I dismantled the old working model where one skilled embroideress would finish an entire garment from start all the way to completion. Simple hemming, edge trimming and loose thread cleanup work got assigned to young apprentices. Only intricate patterns demanding experience and sharp eyes stayed for our senior, seasoned embroideresses. Production speed increased noticeably. Our veteran workers grew less worn out and exhausted than at the beginning. Everything descended into chaos. I stayed working until midnight for 3 nights running. Only by the 4th day did our new workflow begin operating smoothly. Then Kinga rushed hurrying in from the shop's front area. Her expression looked strange. Mississippi young Master Peiyu is here. My writing brush paused hovering above paper. Has he come to purchase clothing? Her mouth twitched. He does not look like a customer out shopping. I walked out into the main sales room. Peiyu stood beside the wooden counter. Half a month had gone by. He still looked neat and composed. But fresh tension settled permanently between his brows that the instant he laid eyes on me. His first words came. I must speak with you. I gestured toward tea-seating benches pushed against the wall. Speak then. He glanced all around the busy shop space. Here. Where else? Matters lying between us ought not be discussed where every stranger can listen in. And exactly what matters are still left between us? His jaw stiffened. Eventually he sat down. I poured tea for myself only. I did not fill a cup for him. He stared at that empty teacup set in front of him. Back in my past life, this would have happened automatically. The moment he sat down, tea would materialize before him without him needing to utter a word. After years of being waited on hand and foot, people truly forget kindness and care are not birth-given entitlements. Sigh, he lowered his voice. Scholar Lin refuses to grant me an audience. For a heartbeat, I genuinely struggled to recall exactly which Scholar Lin he meant. Irritation flashed across his features. Lin Shuyuan. Memory returned. That respected scholar, an acquaintance of my father's. In my old life, Peiyu had desperately wanted an introduction. I had badgered my father endlessly until he finally sent a letter on Peiyu's behalf. This present lifetime, I had never mentioned the subject once. Peiyu drew in a sharp breath. Uncle Shen clearly promised before that he would make an introduction for me. Who promised you that? I asked. He froze. When exactly did my father give you such a promise? His lips moved, but no date or moment would come forth. He could not name one. Because in this timeline, my father had never made such a commitment. Somewhere within Peiyu's mind, favors I had performed once upon a time had transformed into obligations the entire Shen family was naturally bound to fulfill. I lifted my teacup. If young Master Pei wishes to meet Scholar Lin, compose and send your own letter to him. Why come seeking me? You know perfectly well Scholar Lin almost never meets outsiders. And how is that circumstance any of my concern? His expression slowly hardened. And what of the Linshu Street shop? A faint smile touched my lips. That property belongs to me. I know. His voice rose in volume. Several clerks glanced over toward our table. He forced his anger back under control. I only need one answer from you. Are you intentionally taking back every promise you once made? I watched him calmly. What a clever way to twist reality. Things I had once freely chosen to give away. And now he acted as though those gifts ought to keep flowing forever. Peiyu. I set my teacup down upon the table. Let us go through this step by step. I have not taken that shop away from you. It was never yours to begin with. I have not barred Scholar Lin from seeing you. For no letter has been sent on your behalf in this life. What else would you claim I have withdrawn? Peiyu's face looked terrible. A flood of old memories washed over my thoughts. Back in those days of my past life, his mother would fall severely ill with each changing season. I hunted down physicians for her. His paper and ink cost dearly. I secretly arranged for a merchant shop to slip him money each month. Whenever he required new robes, Kinga personally delivered them. None of those things had occurred this time around. I had not harmed him. I had simply stopped giving of myself. Peiyu. I met his gaze. Over all these years, have you mistaken gifts freely given by other people for things you were inherently owed? He shot abruptly to his feet. I never did such a thing. Then what brings you here to me? His breath caught in his throat. The shop went quiet. I chose not to press harder. I simply finished what I needed to say. I have stolen nothing away from you. I have merely stopped handing over what belongs to me. He stood there. His complexion shifted from pale to ashen gray. At last he spoke softly. Shinzai, you have changed. I nodded. I have. This time, I offered no denial. Peiyu stared hard at me. Then he turned and walked out of the shop. Only after he vanished out of sight did I slowly let out a long breath. I felt no rush of triumphant satisfaction. No giddy thrill of revenge. Only a sense of lightness, as though a massive stone weighing heavy upon my chest for years had finally shifted aside. Kinga hurried closer. Miss, are you quite all right? I am fine. I was about to head back toward the workroom when I spotted a carriage parked across the street. The Xia household steward stood beside its wheels. I paused my steps. Xia Lin Yuan descended down to the pavement. When did you arrive? Just moments ago. I glanced toward the steward. That man had learned his lesson well. He tilted his head upward, studying the sky, revealing absolutely nothing that I walked over. How much of our conversation did you overhear? Xia Lin Yuan thought for a second. I caught the final few sentences. Why did you not step inside? You were fully capable of handling those words on your own. For some inexplicable reason my nose stung. In my old life, Peiyu would have told me a woman ought not argue with unrelated men in public. Save disagreements for home. But Xia Lin Yuan never confused protecting me with speaking words in my place. I climbed aboard his carriage. He asked, finished? Then let us head home. Home. That single word made me freeze. We were not yet formally married. Yet in that moment when Xia Lin Yuan spoke of home, I could no longer be certain he meant only the Shen estate. That our wedding date was set 7 days into the future. I thought all that remained ahead was quiet preparation. But on the third morning, Kinga burst rushing back indoors from outside. Miss, people are spreading outrageous gossip all over town. I sat reviewing my dowry inventory list. What rumors? Her cheeks burned bright red. She struggled for a moment before blurting it out. They say marrying the 9,000-year lord means you will end up a living widow. My hand halted mid-page. Silence fell across the room. Kinga watched my face carefully. A question I had never been forced to confront in my prior life had finally arrived. I could no longer base this lifelong decision solely on a ball tossed from a high pavilion balcony. Those rumors spread faster than I could have imagined. Within 2 days, even the elderly woman tending kitchen fires in the Shun household had heard them. That night, my father finally lost his patience. He summoned me to his study. The Xie family marriage contract lay spread open across his desk. Zai. His tone held no anger. If anything, his voice sounded more grave and serious than I had ever known it. If you regret this match now, there is still time to draw back. I kept silent. Since I offered no instant rebuttal, he kept speaking. I will admit Xie Linyuan has acted with greater restraint than I anticipated. He has not leveraged power to coerce you. He has not meddled in Shen family business. But marriage stretches across an entire lifetime. Have you truly thought this all the way through? This time I did not immediately answer yes. My father's words held truth. On that day up in the embroidered pavilion, my choices had been driven by burning rage, memories carried over from another lifetime. Back then I knew only one thing. I could not marry Peiyu. I thought any outcome would prove preferable as long as that ball avoided landing in his arms. But what came after? Time and again I met Xie Linyuan. I read over the marriage contract he had drafted. I watched him wait outside my shop for hours. I received that plain abacus instead of expensive jewels. I saw him stand outside my shop when Peiyu came calling, holding back because he trusted I could manage my own conflicts. Had I merely been running away from Peiyu, or had I truly begun weighing what sharing a lifetime beside this other man might look like? I could not give a careless answer. Early the next morning, I journeyed over to the Xie Manor. Xie Linyuan did not look surprised to see me arrived. You have heard the gossip circulating through the city? I have. Are you afraid? A little. I admitted. To my surprise he nodded. That is reasonable. I stared toward him. Will you not reassure me? Tell me all these reports are complete lies and I ought pay them no mind. He watched me for a while, then replied. Some of those rumors are false. Others are not entirely untrue. My fingers tightened. He did not dodge this difficult subject. When I entered palace service as a young boy, I was formally registered among the palace eunuchs. But at that time, I fell gravely ill. The physical ritual was postponed. Later, the late emperor kept me close by his side for reading and writing. That ceremony was never carried out. For a moment I said nothing. Not out of shock, but because I had not expected such blunt, unvarnished honesty. Xie Linyuan's composure never wavered. Very few souls know this truth. But since we intend to marry, I plan to tell you before our wedding day. I lifted my head. So your body bears no such impairment. He spoke those heavy words with the same flat tone as discussing ordinary weather. My ears suddenly grew warm. He noticed, but mercifully chose not to tease me. Instead he went on speaking. Still, that is not the most important matter here. Shenzai. This marked the very first time he had spoken my full given name directly. His voice remained steady. My official position will not change simply because I take a wife. People will still call me the 9,000-year lord. After you marry me, unkind whispers will continue reaching your ears. Your father's worries are not without good reason. If you wish to end this engagement now, I shall personally escort you safely back to your family home. I stared at him. Will you feel no anger? Why should I? Everyone across the capital witnessed you catching that ball. If I dissolve this agreement now, people will mock you as well. Xie Linyuan leaned back within his chair. They would never dare laugh openly in my presence. Against my will, I laughed. At the very least, he knew his own standing in this world. The corner of his mouth shifted, almost imperceptibly. My gaze dropped. A thin red thread peeked out from my sleeve edge. Leftover thread from when Kinga had been fitting my wedding robes. In that instant, understanding bloomed within me. My reasons for wishing to stay with him never hinged upon whether Xie Linyuan had that physical condition or not. What mattered was this. This man held more than enough power to force me into compliance. Yet from day one, at every critical turn, he asked one simple question. Are you willing that respect I had begged and pleaded for throughout my past 10 years of marriage with Pei Yu? Xie Lin Yuan offered it, as though it were the most ordinary thing imaginable. That I raised my chin. I will not withdraw from this engagement. Clear-cut surprise flickered across his features for the first time. I will be honest, I told him seriously. On that first day, part of my motivation was anger. I thought any man would suffice, so long as it was not Pei Yu. But those are no longer my feelings today. He said nothing. I chose to press forward. 9,000-year lord. When you first agreed to this match, were you also merely thinking you might as well marry me? Silence hung in the air. Then with painful frankness he said, a little. I laughed in disbelief. And now? Xie Lin Yuan held my gaze for a long time. He sat straighter in his chair. Now I intend to marry you. In earnest. 7 days later, I entered the Xie manor at last as his wife. No imperial edict marked our union. No crowd of court officials rushed over to heap flattery upon him. Xie Lin Yuan's status remained unusual, so few guests dared show their faces at our ceremony. Yet every relative belonging to the Shun household turned up. Perhaps they all came half expecting I might change my mind in these final moments. When my bridal sedan chair halted outside the Xie manor gates, whispers filtered through my veil. She truly went through with marrying him. Another voice answered, that Shen girl must have lost her senses. I looked down at my hands. They were perfectly steady. Throughout the wedding rituals, Xie Lin Yuan stood beside me. One length of red silk ribbon linked the two of us together. When the master of ceremonies called for husband and wife to bow to one another, I bent forward. A memory washed over me of my wedding in my previous life. Back then, my heart had burned bright with giddy joy. I thought I had finally grasped the great love of my life. This time no feverish excitement stirred inside me, only quiet steadiness. I understood now. A wedding marked merely a beginning. It supplied no easy answers. Those answers would have to be built slowly day by day, by the two people sharing this marriage. That night, servants escorted me into our bridal chamber. Once they all withdrew, I truly looked around that room for the very first time. Large, clean, expensive, and empty. No cosmetic powders sat laid out on the dressing table. No casual reading books lined the shelves. No fresh flowers sat near the window. Not one small personal trinket rested on any surface to suggest an actual human being resided in this space. Xie Lin Yuan pushed the door open and stepped inside. I lifted my bridal veil. My first question to him was direct. Do you genuinely live in this room? He paused. Why would you say that? I glanced all around. This chamber does not feel lived in at all. He fell silent. A thought crossed my mind. Married life with him might prove far more entertaining than I had anticipated. From our very first day as husband and wife, I learned Xie Lin Yuan truly struggled with the very idea of personal preference. It was not that he could not feed or dress himself. He barely comprehended what the word preference even meant. At breakfast I asked, do you prefer sweet-flavored congee or savory? Either one works. That same afternoon I had bolts of fine cloth brought in. Which shade do you like best? Any will do. That evening I planned new curtains for our bedchamber. Bamboo green or moon white? Either is fine. After the third such exchange I reached my limit. Xie Lin Yuan. He lifted his eyes away from the book he was reading. This marked the first time I had spoken to him using his given name since our wedding ceremony. Is there truly anything you actually like? Surprisingly, he considered my question with total seriousness. Yes. Curiosity sparked inside me. What is it? Quiet. I slapped fabric sample swatches flat against the tabletop. That absolutely does not count. His brows drew together. Plainly, he could not grasp why I objected. So I compiled a long list of every object inside the Xie household that could possibly be replaced. Lamps, teacups, tablecloths, flower pots, bookshelves, even what varieties of trees ought to be planted in our courtyard. I forced a writing brush right into his grasp. Now you make the choices. Xie Lin Yuan stared down that sheet of paper. His expression grew more solemn than when he read weighty imperial memorials. After an absurdly long stretch of time, he finally settled upon one six-sided glass lamp. It was unbelievably ugly, dark, heavy, gloomy. I lifted that lamp up and inspected it 3 separate times. Are you absolutely certain? You told me to pick something. But this lamp is genuinely hideous. His face went completely blank. Then forget it. No. I instantly hugged that lamp tight against my chest. You already made your choice. You are not permitted to go back on it. And so that unattractive lamp got hung inside his study. Every single time I glanced toward it, I wanted to burst out laughing. Xie Linyuan insisted it meant nothing to him. Yet one day a servant nearly knocked it over while cleaning. He stood close by, watched for several long heartbeats, then personally reached out to steady it. I laughed out loud. I thought you said you cared nothing for this lamp. He shot me a cold look. Be quiet. Little by little, the Xie Manor transformed. We planted osmanthus trees within our courtyard. The kitchen created regular meal menus to suit our tastes. I moved my embroidery frame into a side room. Kinga spread fabric samples out to dry in our back courtyard. Even the steward seemed to speak in a louder voice than before. None of these changes meant I planned to stay confined indoors. On our 3rd day of marriage, I headed out to my southern branch shop just as I always had. Several servants within the Xie household clearly found this strange. As I prepared to depart, the steward cautiously spoke up. Madam, are you traveling to the shop again today? Before I could give any answer, Xie Linyuan happened to walk through the corridor. She is going to her own shop. Why do you question this? The steward immediately bowed his head. This servant spoke out of turn. I looked towards Xie Linyuan. He had said those words as though they were the most obvious truth in the whole world. Down at my shop, one of the Xie household attendants who accompanied me kept addressing me as madam. I corrected him twice. Word of this eventually reached Xie Linyuan's ears. He issued a direct official order. Whenever she is working within her shop, address her as proprietor. That very day I stood behind my shop counter. I heard a voice from one of his servants speak. Proprietor, your carriage is prepared and waiting. A sharp stinging pricked at my nose. Not because that title sounded grand and impressive. In my past life, 10 years had passed before I transitioned from being Miss Shun into Madame Pei. In this new life I had entered marriage, yet I had never lost hold of my own identity. Business at my small shop kept growing steadily. I began thinking over plans for expansion. Then the Shun clan called for a formal family gathering. My father sent messengers summoning me back to the family compound. When I arrived at the side hall beside our ancestral shrine, my paternal uncle, multiple clan elders, and Shun Mingxiu already waited. Mingxiu wasted no time beating around the bush. Elder sister, you are now married. Per Shun family customs, daughters who marry outside the clan ought no longer hold authority over clan-owned property. Silence filled the hall. I looked toward her. I felt no surge of anger. This time, she actually had old custom rules backing up her words. My uncle spoke next. Zai, this is not an attack directed toward you. You belong to the Xie household now. If you keep meddling with Jinyan Embroidery House, outsiders will claim the Shun family exploits the 9,000-year lord's power to conduct business. My fingers slowly tightened around my teacup. At last I understood a vital lesson. In my past life, I had yielded ground again and again. Everyone grew to treat my retreat as something natural and expected. Now that I wanted what belonged to me back, I could not fix every conflict simply by stating these things were mine from the very start. I lifted my head. Grant me 3 days. Mingxiu frowned. For what purpose? I need to examine old property deeds. I will not fight over ancestral clan property. But those possessions originally left behind by my mother, those ought at minimum to be sorted out clearly and separated. A wind gust drifted in through open doors. I thought once more about that red embroidered ball. At first, I had only wanted to change the man I married. Now I understood that had been the simple part. The real challenge lay in reclaiming my own life, inch by inch, pushing back against every old rule that tried to claim ownership over me. Back inside the Xie Manor, I pried open every chest holding my mother's old belongings. Kinga assisted me. We worked through the entire night. Property deeds, ancient account ledgers, dividend payment receipts spread all across Xie Lin Yuan's study table. When Xie Lin Yuan returned home that evening, half his study space was buried under stacks of documents. He paused in the doorway. "What are you working on?" "Searching for certain papers." "Do you require assistance?" I shook my head. "No," he glanced across the piles covering his table. "Have you eaten anything today?" "I am not hungry." He chose not to argue with me. He simply turned and walked away. A quarter hour later, the steward entered carrying a bowl of hot freshly made noodles. "Madam Proprietor." He corrected himself before I could speak up. "My lord ordered the kitchen to prepare this for you." I lifted my gaze. What message did he send along? Only that they ought not prepare anything overly elaborate. Cold food would taste unpleasant. I still clutched an account book in my hands. A soft smile came over my face. He had not chased me away from my work. He had not snatched papers right out of my grasp. He had merely ensured food sat within my reach. No need for me to stand up and seek it out. That was simply how Xie Lin Yuan cared for other people. Early the next morning, I finally unearthed a deed document dating back 12 years. The Yinshui dye workshop. In present times, this generated Jinyan embroidery house's largest profits. Yet originally, this property had never belonged to Shen clan ancestral holdings at all. My mother had purchased this courtyard using money from her own personal dowry, after she married into the Shen family. Later its operations merged under Jinyun's management, but legal ownership stayed recorded under her name. Upon her passing, it automatically passed down to me. In my previous life, I had never carefully read these papers. My father merely told me it was all Shen family business anyway. I would still receive dividend shares. And I had believed him. Now that yellowed old deed felt surprisingly heavy resting within my palms. 3 days afterwards, the Shen family gathered once again. When Shen Mingxiu saw those documents I carried, her expression shifted slightly. I wasted no extra time. I spread all papers out flat on the hall table. "I will withdraw completely from managing ancestral clan business." Visible relief washed over my uncle's face. Then I set one hand atop the Yinshui dye workshop deed. But this property belonged to my mother personally. For these many years it may have been managed alongside Jinyan Embroidery House, yet its accounts always tracked its separate shares. If clan rules say a married daughter cannot administer ancestral holdings, then separate out that property which was never clan-owned in the first place. Commotion erupted throughout the room. Mingxi was the first to jump to her feet. "Separate it out? Elder sister, do you grasp just how large a portion of Jinyun's profits originate from Yinshui dye workshop?" "I know full well," I answered her calmly. "Which is exactly why it cannot simply be counted as Shen clan property when it never was." Her features darkened. "You leverage your marriage into the Xia household to pressure the Shen family into dividing assets." I held my peace. My father frowned and spoke first. "Mingxiu, what connection does this have with the Xia manor?" For the first time she fell silent. I watched my father himself draw a dividing line between my choices and my husband's authority. It was a small moment, yet something inside me loosened. In the end, all assets got recalculated strictly following the wording on old deeds. The Yinshui dye workshop and my southern shop were formally split away from Jinyan Embroidery House's books. Multiple fabric supply channels first built through my mother's investments were separated off as well. All these properties came fully into my possession, that I chose not to keep using the old Jinyan business name. I picked a brand new title, Zion House. The Shi character taken from my own given name. Yin taken from the Yinshui dye workshop my mother had left behind. No deafening drum fanfare marked the hanging of our new shop signboard. I invited only a small handful of regular long-time customers. I stood out front, staring at that new sign for a very long while. Shen Mingxiu also appeared. She stood just outside our small gathering of people. Her expression was far from friendly. "Elder sister has truly grown powerful since wedding the 9,000-year lord. Even ancestral family property can be split apart whenever you demand it." I understood exactly what she meant to imply. "You still believe Xie Lin Yuan is the source of everything I can accomplish, do you not?" I saw no point launching into arguments right there. Just then, A fabric merchant stepped forward with a smile. He spotted Xie Lin Yuan standing quietly behind me. Instantly he grew nervous. The 9,000-year lord has also graced us with his presence. Xie Lin Yuan offered only a quiet nod of acknowledgement. The merchant laughed awkwardly. My lord permits his own wife to run business ventures out of doors. My brows drew together. Before I could open my mouth to reply, Xie Lin Yuan turned toward that merchant. She runs her own business. Why ought she need my permission? The merchant apologized repeatedly, thoroughly mortified that I stood there for several heartbeats. I leaned in close toward Xie Lin Yuan. What? Nothing. I just noticed something. What thing? Some of the things you say can be rather pleasant to hear. He paused. Occasionally. I nodded deliberately. Only occasionally. That evening after Zion House closed for the day, an unexpected figure lingered beneath our new shop signboard. Pay you. He stared up at the sign for a long time. Then he turned toward me. Is this what you fought so hard to achieve? I looked back toward him. No. This is merely one among many things I intend to accomplish. His expression shifted. I realized in that moment. Even now, Peiyu still had not fully accepted one simple truth.